A village nobody outside its own county could name a year ago has changed hands so many times that even the people paid to track this war can't say, with total confidence, who holds it right now. Not because nobody's watching. Analysts are staring at satellite passes, drone footage, and geotagged clips almost around the clock, and they still can't give you a clean answer. That's not a failure of intelligence. According to the Institute for the Study of War's December 31st assessment of the Russian offensive campaign, it's simply what this war has become, a fight measured in tree lines and the edges of villages, not sweeping arrows on a map. For nearly 2 years, the pattern along the eastern front in Ukraine's Donetsk Oblast has been the same. And the Institute's year-end report is really a snapshot of that pattern holding, once again, as 2025 comes to a close. Russian mechanized and infantry units, ISW reports, kept pressing forward in small, grinding increments, a foothold on the outskirts of one settlement, a contested strip of tree line outside another, a basement cleared and then lost again 48 hours later. Nothing that looks, on a map, like a breakthrough. Everything that looks, on the ground, like exhaustion. So here's the real question this video is going to answer. When an institute like ISW says Russia is advancing, what does that actually mean? How do they know? And where does their picture stop matching the version Russian officials want the world to believe? Stick with that question, because by the end, the gap between those two pictures tells you more about this war than either side's press releases do. Start with what ISW actually is, because the name gets thrown around a lot without much explanation. It's a Washington-based research organization that has published a daily assessment of the war in Ukraine since Russia's full-scale invasion began in February 2022. It isn't a government agency, and it isn't embedded with troops. What it produces instead is an open-source synthesis, a daily attempt to reconstruct, from public information, what's actually happening across hundreds of kilometers of front line that almost no independent journalist can walk in person. That open-source picture is built from a specific, disclosed set of inputs. Geolocated combat footage, meaning video or photos posted online that analysts can pin to an exact location using landmarks, terrain, and shadows. Statements and claims from Russian and Ukrainian military bloggers, a loosely organized but often well-informed online ecosystem that both militaries' own supporters use to celebrate gains or vent about failures. And official statements, most notably Ukraine's General Staff updates and Russian Ministry of Defense claims, sources ISW treats not as fact but as claims to be checked against everything else. Picture the actual mechanics of that verification for a second, because it's less dramatic and more meticulous than most people imagine. An analyst pulls up a 9-second clip, maybe a soldier's helmet cam, maybe a drone feed uploaded to a Telegram channel. There's no caption worth trusting. So they freeze a frame, pull out a distinctive roofline, a bent utility pole, the angle of a tree line against a field boundary, and start cross-referencing it against archived satellite imagery and older geolocated footage from the same sector. Sometimes it takes minutes. Sometimes a single ambiguous clip sits in a queue for days while 3 different sectors get checked first, because the front doesn't pause for anyone's workload. Here's where it actually gets hard. Video gets posted with no timestamp, or a timestamp that turns out to be wrong. A blogger celebrating a liberation today might be describing a raid that happened, and reversed, a week ago. Winter weather, heavy cloud cover, snow, short daylight cuts down the flow of usable footage from exactly the stretches of front where fighting is heaviest, which means some of the most consequential ground can go days without solid visual confirmation either way. ISW's answer to that isn't to guess. It's to hold a claim as unconfirmed until the evidence catches up, even when that leaves gaps in the map that persist for days at a time. One detail that stuck with me going through months of these daily updates: the Institute doesn't just report what Russia gained. A large share of every assessment is spent explaining what it could not confirm, a discipline that's easy to miss if you only skim the map graphic and not the write-up underneath it. By the time you reach the December 31st report, that discipline is exactly what separates ISW's read of Donetsk Oblast from the version Russian state media was putting out the same week. And that gap between what's assessed and what's merely claimed is where the next part of this story actually lives. Because here's the pattern the December 31st assessment describes. Russian forces, per ISW's mapping, continued a slow push across multiple sectors of Donetsk Oblast. Not a single dramatic advance, but simultaneous, low-intensity pressure at several points along the line, consistent with the meat grinder tempo that's defined this front through most of 2024 and 2025. Gains, where ISW could confirm them, were typically described in terms of tree lines, individual buildings, or the outskirts of settlements. The kind of terrain that shows up as a few hundred meters on a map, if it shows up at all. That's a strikingly different picture from Russian Ministry of Defense statements over the same stretch, which periodically announced the liberation or capture of settlements that ISW's own mapping continued to list as contested or still under Ukrainian control weeks later. ISW isn't shy about naming that gap. Its reports routinely note when a Kremlin claim outpaces what geolocated evidence actually supports, not to accuse Moscow of lying outright, but to flag that a claim and a confirmed fact are two different things, and that the December 31st assessment, like the ones before it, is built only from the second category. It's worth sitting with what actually buys one of those few hundred meters, because the map graphic strips that part out entirely. SW's own reporting, drawing on Ukrainian general staff figures and independent loss trackers, has described Russian units taking sustained, heavy personnel and equipment losses to secure exactly the kind of terrain this report is talking about. A tree line, a rail embankment, a cluster of farm buildings. Assault groups go in small, sometimes on foot, sometimes on motorcycles or in stripped-down civilian vehicles to avoid drone strikes, and a meaningful share of them don't come back from the attempt that finally works. That's the arithmetic sitting underneath every quiet, incremental gain the December 31st assessment logs. It just never makes it onto the map itself. What's most surprising about this, honestly, isn't that the two pictures diverge. You'd expect that from a wartime government's press office. It's how small the disputed territory usually turns out to be. We're not talking about entire towns changing hands overnight in the official Russian telling versus a Ukrainian-held reality. We're talking about a farm building, a rail siding, a stretch of forest a few hundred meters deep. The war being fought over inches doesn't photograph well, and it doesn't compress into a headline, which may be part of why the daily reality of Donetsk Oblast gets so little sustained coverage compared to how much it actually shapes the war. Here's what this tells us about the state of the conflict heading into 2026. Neither side's official statements are a substitute for verification, and an institute quietly cross-checking blurry phone video against military blogger chatter day after day has become one of the more reliable windows the public has into a war that neither government wants watched too closely. That's not a comfortable thing to say about open-source intelligence replacing official briefings, but it's where the incentives on both sides have pushed things. And that raises the harder question the December 31st report doesn't answer, because it isn't ISW's job to answer it. If Russia has been grinding forward in Donetsk Oblast for 2 straight years without a breakthrough, at what point does advancing stop, meaning anything close to what it sounds like? SW's own assessments are careful never to predict how the war ends. That's a discipline worth noticing in an information environment where almost everyone else is willing to guess. Here's the take that'll probably get us some pushback. The daily frontline map has become, for a lot of people following this war online, something it was never meant to be. A scoreboard, checked the way you'd check a sports score, as if a few hundred meters of red or blue settles something. ISW itself doesn't present its maps that way. It presents them as a provisional, correctable snapshot, revised constantly as better evidence comes in. The people sharing screenshots of that map as proof one side is winning or losing are doing something the Institute's own methodology explicitly warns against. There's a second complication worth sitting with, because it's the one ISW flags most consistently in its own writing. Verifying Russian MOD claims that go beyond confirmed geolocation isn't just difficult, it's sometimes structurally impossible in real time. When a settlement sits in a contested zone with no cell coverage, no journalists, and fighting that makes filming from either side extremely dangerous, an assessment can only say what it can say contested, unconfirmed, disputed for days, sometimes longer, before the picture clears. So, genuinely, put yourself in the position of an analyst at a desk in Washington, staring at a grainy 9-second clip someone uploaded from a phone, trying to decide if the tree line in the background matches satellite imagery from 3 sectors of front, each one shifting by the week. What do you think? Should the public treat a daily war map as settled fact, or as the best available guess, revised tomorrow? That's not a rhetorical question. It's the actual judgment call SW's analysts make every single day, and it's worth having an opinion on before you next share one of their maps as proof of anything. It also isn't a one-way process. SW's assessments get revised backward as often as forward. A settlement logged as contested one week quietly shifts back to Ukrainian-held the next, once slower evidence catches up, without any announcement calling attention to the correction. That's not a flaw in the system. It's the system working as designed. A map that never gets walked back isn't a careful map. It's a confident one. And confidence is exactly what this kind of open source verification is built to resist. None of this changes the broader shape of what the December 31st assessment describes. Russia's push through Donetsk Oblast at the close of 2025 remains what it has been for most of the past 2 years. Attritional, incremental, and expensive, without the kind of operational breakthrough that would let anyone credibly call it a turning point. ISW's report doesn't forecast one. It doesn't predict how or when the front stabilizes, and it's careful to say so. What it does do is keep a running, checkable record. That discipline matters more than any single day's map, because it's the only thing standing between the public and two governments, each with every incentive to describe this war in the terms that suit them best. We left one detail out of this one for time, a smaller discrepancy in how the two sides count contested versus confirmed territory that's worth its own explainer. Comment more if you want us to dig into that next, because it's the kind of granular methodology question that actually explains a lot of the noise you see online about this war. For now, the honest summary is the unglamorous one. As of December 31st, the front in Donetsk Oblast had moved, but only barely, only in places, and only where the evidence actually supports it. Everything past that line is a claim, not a fact, and knowing the difference is, in the end, the whole point of reading an assessment like this one instead of just the headline.